The Trials of a Princess. In the heart of the galactic Concordat, where civilizations spanning thousands of years had come together in unity, stood the Imperial Palace, a gleaming monolith of light and crystal, a beacon of wisdom and power. Within its vast halls, where the air hummed with the weight of history, Princess Ilara sat upon her ornate seat, her gaze sharp and unwavering as yet another suitor failed the trials she had set. The young man before her, a celebrated mathematician from the core worlds, trembled as the final riddle loomed before him. Sweat beaded on his brow, despite the cool, controlled climate of the palace. The floating holographic interface flickered with an array of symbols and equations, each demanding a solution beyond mere calculation. His lips parted in a silent gasp as he realized he had made a critical mistake. A hush fell over the chamber. The nobles, diplomats, and dignitaries of 100 species leaned in with anticipation. Ilara's expression remained unreadable. With the calm precision of a judge delivering a verdict, she spoke. "You have failed the final test," she said, her voice measured but firm. "You may leave." The suitor's face twisted in anguish, his hopes crushed beneath the weight of expectation. As he turned, shoulders slumped, the gathered spectators murmured among themselves. It was the same story that had played out 312 times before. A standard set too high. From his floating throne, Emperor Rendell observed his daughter with a mixture of admiration and concern. She was brilliant, a prodigy of intellect and diplomacy, but her standards were beyond reach. Beside him, a holographic advisor flickered into being. "Your Majesty, may I speak plainly?" The Emperor inclined his head. The advisor cleared his throat. "Your daughter's expectations are unattainable. The Concordat cannot wait forever for a ruler's consort." The Emperor sighed. "You think I do not know this, but she is resolute. She believes that someone somewhere will rise to her challenge." The advisor hesitated. "And if no one ever does?" The Emperor had no answer. Meanwhile, Ilara stood, her silver ceremonial robes shimmering under the light of the 3 suns that streamed through the crystal dome above. She was the embodiment of poise, but her thoughts swirled in restless motion. She had designed these tests to find not just intelligence, but adaptability, ingenuity, and courage. The future ruler of the galactic Concordat needed a partner who could navigate not just numbers and theories, but the unpredictable chaos of leadership itself. She turned to her attendants. "Bring forth the next list of candidates." The servants moved swiftly, activating a projection of the upcoming suitors. A display of holographic images and credentials filled the space before her, each representing an individual of exceptional intellect, political standing, or physical prowess. None had succeeded before. Would one of these? A challenge beyond intelligence. As the palace prepared for the next round of trials, the debate about Ilara's standards raged among the noble houses and high-ranking officials. Some accused her of deliberately crafting the tests to be impossible. The door slid open silently, revealing Emperor Rendell. He stepped inside, his presence commanding yet gentle. He watched her for a moment, taking in the sight of his daughter poring over her work, her mind always seeking, always questioning. "You know," he said finally, "your mother never made me solve puzzles before agreeing to rule by my side." Ilara smiled faintly but did not look up. "Different times, father. The galaxy grows more complex every day. We cannot afford to choose a leader by tradition alone." Arrival at the palace. 4 days later, Kale found himself standing in the grand atrium of the Imperial Palace, surrounded by the galaxy's finest minds. It had taken everything he had, lying, bribing, bluffing, to even get this far. The trials were supposed to be open to all, but in reality, only the elite ever made it past the first screening. Kale had barely slipped through, his application flagged as questionable, before some bureaucratic oversight allowed him to proceed. Now, as he stood amid the towering spires of the palace, he felt the weight of 100 scrutinizing eyes. Every other contestant was dressed in elegant robes or high-tech bodysuits. He wore a patched-up jacket and scuffed boots. A sleek droid hovered in front of the gathered challengers, its mechanical voice filling the chamber. Candidates, welcome. The trials of Princess Ilara will commence shortly. Your first challenge is one of perception. The walls shimmered, and suddenly, the vast atrium transformed into a sprawling maze of shifting light and shadow. Kale barely had time to curse before the floor beneath him gave way. The trial begins. He landed with a rough roll, his instincts keeping him from breaking anything. Around him, the other contestants had fallen into different sections of the maze, each isolated from the others. Kale pushed himself to his feet and scanned his surroundings. The walls pulsed with shifting symbols, some familiar, some entirely alien. A voice crackled to life in his ear, calm and authoritative. This is a test of observation and adaptability, Princess Ilara's voice announced. There are two ways out. One path leads to success. The other does not. Kale exhaled. Great. He had no advanced degrees, no formal training. But what he did have was a lifetime of surviving impossible situations. He studied the symbols carefully. The patterns repeated, but something was off. One set of markings flickered every few seconds, almost like a heartbeat. He reached out and pressed a hand to the nearest symbol. The wall shifted instantly, revealing a hidden corridor. A smirk tugged at his lips. "All right, Princess," he muttered. "Let's see what else you've got." A dance with shadows. Kel moved swiftly through the dimly lit corridor, his heart pounding against his ribs. The walls shimmered and pulsed, shifting unpredictably like living entities. He had no idea how the other challengers were faring, but he knew one thing: he had to stay ahead, or he'd be left behind. The maze was a test of observation and adaptability, but it was also a test of instinct. Every few steps, the passage shifted, altering its structure in ways that defied logic. Kel had already encountered dead ends that hadn't been there moments before and walls that dissolved into mist only to reform behind him. He paused, studying the glowing symbols along the walls. They weren't just decorations. They were instructions, some kind of ancient script guiding those who could decipher it. He ran a hand through his tousled hair, exhaling sharply. He wasn't a scholar. He wasn't a scientist. But he was a survivor. A soft hum filled the air, and Kale turned just in time to see a section of the floor drop away, revealing a pit lined with jagged metallic spikes. He took a hasty step back, his breath hitching. "Okay," he muttered. "That would have been bad." The pit remained open for a few seconds before sealing shut again, as if the maze itself was testing his reaction time. "Stay sharp, Varen." The others. Elsewhere in the maze, the elite contestants were facing their own struggles. Lord Reynold Cashin, a decorated strategist from the House of Varen, moved methodically, his mind calculating every possible variable. He saw the symbols for what they were: an algorithm, a mathematical sequence dictating the maze's movements. He adjusted his steps accordingly, predicting shifts before they happened. Across from him, Lysa Tarn, a cybernetically enhanced prodigy from the Techno Syndicate, relied on her neural implants to scan for hidden pathways. The maze's unpredictability frustrated her, but she pressed on, determined to outthink the system. And then there was Princess Ilara herself, watching from a hidden chamber, her gaze locked onto Kel's progress. Unlike the others, he had no noble lineage, no advanced training. Yet he moved with an effortless intuition that intrigued her. She leaned forward, speaking softly to her attendants. "Who is he?" A droid responded with a mechanical chirp. "Kale Varen. Background unknown. No formal education. Possible criminal affiliations." Ilara's eyes narrowed. "Interesting." The dead end. Kale took another turn and came face to face with a dead end. Unlike the others he had encountered, this one didn't shift or waver. The wall was solid, unyielding. He frowned, stepping closer. Something was off. The symbols here were different, etched deeper, pulsing in an irregular rhythm. He reached out, running his fingers along the markings. A sudden jolt of energy shot through his arm, and the wall vanished in an instant, revealing the hidden passage. Cale exhaled, shaking out his hand. Noted, don't touch glowing walls unless you have to. He stepped through the passage, entering a vast chamber unlike anything he had seen before. The room was circular, the ceiling high and domed, covered in constellations that shifted and swirled. In the center, a floating pedestal held a single ornate key, intricately crafted, shimmering with an ethereal glow. Cale wasn't the first to arrive. Reynold Cashin stood on the opposite side of the chamber, his sharp eyes locking onto Cal's with mild curiosity. Lysa Tarn was there too, scanning the key with a device embedded in her wrist. And then, without warning, the walls of the chamber came alive. Dark figures emerged from the shadows, faceless constructs of pure energy, moving with eerie precision. Cale barely had time to react before one lunged at him. The fight for the key. Instinct took over. Cale ducked, rolling to the side as the construct's energy blade sliced through the air where he had been standing. Reynold drew a thin, curved saber, his movements controlled and deliberate as he slashed at the nearest construct. Lysa activated an energy field around herself, analyzing the construct's attack patterns. Cale, however, had no weapon. He dodged another strike, using his surroundings to his advantage. He grabbed a loose stone from the floor and hurled it at the construct's head. It passed through harmlessly, but the distraction gave him just enough time to reposition himself. Think, Cale. He studied the way the constructs moved. They weren't attacking at random. They were defending the key, which meant there had to be a way past them. He scanned the chamber, searching for an opening. Something, anything, that could give him an advantage. Then he saw it. The shadows of the constructs weren't natural. They flickered, pulsed, tied to the same symbols that had guided him through the maze. The symbols were their weakness. Without hesitation, he darted toward the nearest wall, pressing his hand against a glowing inscription. The moment his skin made contact, the construct nearest to him faltered, its form flickering violently before dissipating into nothing. Reynold and Lysa noticed. That's it, Lysa murmured, adjusting her strategy. The three of them moved swiftly, disrupting the symbols, dismantling the constructs one by one. Finally, only one remained. The guardian of the key. It was larger than the rest, its energy form crackling with raw power. Cale exchanged glances with the others. We take it together, Reynold said. Cale grinned. I was hoping you'd say that. The three of them attacked at once. Reynold's blade clashed with the Guardian's energy staff, while Lysa fired an electromagnetic pulse from her wrist device. Cale, seeing an opening, slid beneath the Guardian's sweeping attack and pressed his palm against the final inscription. A burst of light filled the chamber. The Guardian let out a soundless cry before vanishing into nothingness. Silence fell. Cale pushed himself up, breathing heavily. His eyes went to the key, still floating in the center of the chamber. Without hesitation, he reached out and took it. The moment his fingers closed around the metal, a deep, resonant chime echoed through the room. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the trial was over. The walls shimmered, the chamber dissolving into a new scene, the imperial court. Dozens of noble figures watched from their seats, murmuring amongst themselves. At the highest throne, Princess Ilara stood, her piercing gaze fixed on Cale. He straightened, gripping the key tightly in his palm. Well, he muttered, that was unexpected. Ilara smiled, a glint of amusement in her eyes. Welcome to the next stage, Calvarin.